The great Mike Tyson comes to beg for his brother's life, like a scared little dog begging for scraps from the table. Mike stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides and his eyes locked on the man who had just spoken those words. 12 men with guns pointed their weapons at Mike, but not a single one of them pulled the trigger or even moved an inch. "Mike, you should not have come here, brother, because these men are going to kill us both tonight in this cold place." Victor laughed, and the sound of it bounced off the concrete walls of the warehouse on that cold March night in 1992. "I did not come here to beg for anything, Victor. And you know that because you know exactly who I am and what I can do." The guard named Sal felt his hands shake as he held his gun, because he had seen Mike Tyson fight on television many times before. The clock on the wall showed 9:45 at night, and the cold air from the broken windows made everyone's breath turn to mist. "You think your fists scare me, Tyson, when I have 12 guns pointed at your chest right now in this very room, my friend?" Mike did not answer with words, but instead, he smiled just a little bit, and that smile made two of the guards take a step back. "Boss, I heard stories about this man and what he did to those guys in Atlantic City last year when they tried to rob him." "Shut your mouth, Tommy, because those are just stupid stories that people made up to scare children and weak men like you are." Mike crossed his arms over his chest and looked at each of the 12 armed men one by one very slowly and carefully. "Mike, please, just go and save yourself because I got myself into this mess when I borrowed money from these bad people last month. I am not leaving this building without you, Rodney. So these men need to make a choice right now about how this night will end." "You hear that, boys? The boxer thinks he can tell us what to do, like he is some kind of boss in his own movie." Marco remembered the fight where Mike Tyson knocked a man out in just 91 seconds, and his hands would not stop shaking after that thought. The 12 armed men formed a loose circle around Mike, but the circle had gaps because none of them wanted to stand too close to him. "Victor, I am going to give you one chance to walk away from this, because my mother raised me to give warnings before I act on them." Victor pulled a silver pistol from his jacket and pointed it at Rodney's head with his finger resting gently on the trigger of the weapon. "Please do not shoot me, Victor, because I swear I will get you your money if you just give me 2 more weeks to find it." Mike's hands turned into fists so tight that the veins on his forearms started to show through his dark brown skin very clearly now. "Your brother owes me $300,000. Tyson and I do not accept payment in the form of punches or threats from famous fighters." Mike reached slowly into his jacket pocket, and every guard in the room lifted their gun higher, but Mike just pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper was old and worn at the edges, like it had been folded and unfolded many times over many years by careful hands. "What is that supposed to be, Tyson? Some kind of check or maybe a love letter from your mother telling you to be a good boy tonight?" "This is a letter from a man named Cus D'Amato, who was like a father to me, and who taught me everything I know about fighting." Every man in the warehouse went quiet and listened, because they had all heard the name Cus D'Amato, and they knew what he meant to Mike. "Cus wrote this letter to me on the day he died back in 1985, and I have read it every single day since that sad day." Sal lowered his weapon just a bit because he remembered reading about Cus D'Amato in a sports magazine when he was a young boy in school. The letter began with the words, "Michael, my son," and just seeing those words made Mike's hands shake, just a tiny bit for one moment. "Cus wrote to me and said, Michael, my son, you have a gift that goes far beyond your fists and your speed in the boxing ring. I did not come here tonight to listen to some dead old man's words about boxing and gifts. So can we please get back to business now?" Mike took one big step forward, and 3 of the guards flinched hard, but still nobody pulled the trigger because fear had frozen their fingers completely. "Cus also wrote that my gift is the power to make men see their own weakness just by standing in front of them and looking at them." Marco set his gun down on the crate and took 3 steps backward toward the exit door because his body had decided to run before his mind could. "Marco, you coward, if you walk out that door, I swear to God I will find your family and make them pay for your weakness tonight." Marco froze in place, because he did not know which man scared him more and his body could not decide which way to run from this place. Mike took another step forward, and he was now only 8 feet away from Victor, and the armed guards started to look at each other with doubt. That is my brother right there, and you all made a big mistake when you thought you could use me to get to him tonight in this place. Victor raised his gun back to Rodney's head, and his hand was shaking now because Mike was getting closer with each passing second of this standoff. Cuss also told me that one day I would face a room full of men who wanted to hurt me, and that day I would understand everything. The warehouse was so quiet that everyone could hear the sound of a rat running across the concrete floor somewhere in the dark back corner. I did not sign up for this kind of job, boss, because that man right there is not just a boxer, he is something else completely different from normal men. You are all cowards and fools, and I will remember every single one of you who lowered your weapon tonight when I needed you the most here. Mike cracked his neck to the left and then to the right, and the popping sound echoed through the warehouse, like small firecrackers going off in sequence. I quit this job right now, boss, because $300,000 is not worth dying for, and that man is going to kill all of us. 4 of the 12 guards had now lowered their weapons, but 8 guards still had their guns pointed at Mike, who did not seem to care at all. Mike took off his leather jacket slowly and dropped it to the floor, and his arms were so big and strong that one guard actually gasped out loud. His arms were covered with old scars from years of hard training, and his fists looked like 2 hammers made of bone and dark brown skin. Victor pulled Rodney up from the chair and held him in front of his body like a shield, because he knew he could not beat Mike in a fair fight. Mike, he is using me as a shield, and I cannot break free because my hands are tied so tight that I cannot feel my fingers anymore. Mike stood there in his white t-shirt looking at his brother being used as a human shield, and his jaw tightened with anger he could barely control. Victor, you are making the worst mistake of your life right now, because if you hurt my brother, I will not stop until I find everyone you love. A large guard named Big Tony stepped forward with 2 pistols in his hands, and he was the only man in the room who did not seem afraid. I have killed 37 men in my life, Tyson, and you are just another name that I am going to add to my list tonight right here. Mike turned to face Big Tony, and that small smile came back to his face again, because now he had someone who was willing to fight him fairly. Big Tony and Mike stood 10 feet apart, and every other person in the warehouse watched, because they knew something very violent was about to happen right now. I am going to shoot you in both knees first, and then I am going to watch you crawl on the floor like a dog begging for mercy. You talk too much, Tony, and Cuss always told me that men who talk too much before a fight are the ones who are scared the most inside. Big Tony's fingers started to squeeze the trigger, but his eyes kept jumping between Mike's chest and Mike's face, and he could not decide where to shoot first. Mike exploded forward like a bullet from a gun, and Big Tony fired both pistols, but the shots went wide because Mike was already too close to hit. Mike's right fist connected with Big Tony's jaw, and the sound was like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon, and Tony's eyes rolled back into his head. Big Tony fell backward like a chopped tree, and his 2 pistols flew from his hands, and he was unconscious before his body even hit the concrete floor. Every guard in the warehouse froze in complete shock, because Big Tony was the toughest man any of them had ever known, and Mike had dropped him instantly. Mike was not even breathing hard as he turned slowly to face Victor, and his brother, and his eyes were as cold as ice on a winter lake. 3 more guards dropped their guns and ran for the back exit door because they had just seen something that told them this fight was already over for them. Stay back, Tyson, or I swear on my mother's grave I will blow your brother's brains out right now, and I am not joking about this at all. Only 5 guards remained in the warehouse now, and all of them had shaking hands as Mike walked slowly toward Victor, like death itself coming to collect a debt. Victor, I want you to listen very carefully to what I am about to say, because I am only going to say these words one single time tonight. Rodney had tears running down his face, but he did not make any sound, because he trusted his brother and he knew Mike had a plan for this moment. You do not get to make demands here, Tyson, because I am the one with the gun, and I am the one who decides who lives or dies tonight. Mike reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope and held it up so Victor could see it clearly in the yellow light. The envelope was stuffed with so much cash that $100 bills were sticking out the top, and it looked like it could pay off the entire debt. Every eye in the warehouse was now locked on that envelope full of money, and Victor's gun hand lowered just a tiny bit without him even noticing it. There is $500,000 in this envelope, Victor, which is $200,000 more than what my brother owes you for his gambling debts right now. Victor's eyes went wide with greed, because $500,000 was more money than he had made in the last 2 years of running his criminal business. Victor's gun hand dropped slowly away from Rodney's head, because his greed was stronger than his need for revenge, and Mike had counted on exactly that happening tonight. Victor pushed Rodney forward toward Mike and reached out his free hand for the envelope, because he wanted that money more than he wanted to hurt anyone now. Rodney stumbled forward and Mike caught him with one strong arm while keeping the envelope held up high, where Victor could still see all that beautiful money. Mike whispered in his brother's ear words that no one else in the warehouse could hear, and Rodney nodded and started to move slowly toward the exit door behind them. Give me the money, Tyson, and we can forget this whole night ever happened, and your brother can walk out of here alive and in one piece. Rodney reached the exit door and Mike saw his brother was safe, and that was when Mike's face changed into something that made Victor's blood run cold instantly. I said I would give you one chance to walk away, Victor, but you did not take it, and now I am going to teach you a lesson instead. Victor's face went pale white, and he raised his gun toward Mike, but his hand was shaking so badly that he could not aim the weapon at all now. Mike's left hand shot out like a snake and grabbed Victor's wrist and twisted it hard until everyone in the warehouse heard the bones crack like dry sticks breaking. Victor screamed in pain and his gun clattered to the concrete floor, and the 5 remaining guards raised their weapons, but none of them dared to pull the trigger. My wrist you broke, my wrist you animal, and I am going to have you killed for this, I swear on everything I love. I will destroy you. Cuss taught me that a man who threatens children and families deserves no mercy, and tonight I am going to show you what that lesson means, Victor. Mike threw Victor backward like a rag doll, and the crime boss crashed into 2 of his own guards, and they all fell down in a pile of arms and legs. A young guard named Jimmy dropped his gun and ran for the exit because he was only 25 years old, and he did not want to die tonight. Mike walked toward Victor, who was trying to crawl away on the floor, and Mike's shadow fell over the crime boss, like the shadow of death itself coming. Please do not kill me, Tyson, and I will give you anything you want, and I will leave your brother alone forever, and I promise you on my life. The last 3 guards dropped their weapons and raised their hands because they were not willing to die for a boss who was crying and begging on the dirty floor. Mike reached down and grabbed Victor by the collar of his expensive suit and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing at all, because to Mike he did not. Victor had tears on his face and snot running from his nose, and all the pride and cruelty from earlier that night had disappeared from his eyes completely now. I am not going to kill you, Victor, because Cuss also taught me that death is too easy, and that some men need to live with their shame instead. The warehouse looked like a battlefield with Big Tony still unconscious on the floor, and weapons dropped everywhere, and 3 guards standing with their hands raised in total surrender. Mike dropped Victor to the floor and the crime boss landed hard on his back, and Mike looked down at him with eyes that showed nothing but cold disappointment. Thank you for not killing me, Tyson, and I swear I will never bother your family again. And you will never see my face again, I promise you. Mike walked toward the exit door where his brother was waiting, and he stepped over all the dropped guns on the floor, and he did not look back even once. Rodney grabbed Mike and hugged him so tight that neither of them could breathe properly, and Rodney cried into his brother's shoulder with pure relief and love. I told you I would never leave you behind, Rodney, because that is what Cuss taught me about family, and that is what our mother would have wanted. The two brothers stood in the doorway with the cold March air blowing in and the lights of Brooklyn glowing in the distance, like a million small stars. We need to talk about your gambling problem, Rodney, because this cannot happen again. And next time I might not get here in time to save you, brother. Rodney nodded with shame on his face, and he wiped the tears from his eyes, and he knew his brother was right about everything he was saying right now. Mike untied the ropes around his brother's wrists, and the skin underneath was red and raw where the rough rope had been cutting into him all night long. Inside the warehouse, Victor was still crying on the floor, and Big Tony was starting to wake up, and the three guards just stood there, not knowing what to do. I quit this job, Victor, and I am never working for you again because tonight you showed me that you are just a small, weak man after all. Victor's eyes filled with rage again, but his body was too broken to act on that rage, and all he could do was lie there and hate everyone around him. Mike and Rodney walked away from the warehouse down a dark Brooklyn street, with steam rising from the sewer grates and yellow streetlights glowing above their heads. Mike put his arm around his brother's shoulder, even though he was cold in just his white t-shirt, because family was more important than being comfortable right now to him. How did you know that Victor would take the money, Mike? And how did you know his men would not shoot you when you walked in there tonight? Cuss taught me how to read men, and he taught me that fear is more powerful than any gun, and that greed will always win over loyalty and bad men. The Brooklyn skyline rose up ahead of them with all its bright lights, and the two brothers walked toward it, leaving the dark warehouse district far behind them now. Mike reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter from Cuss again, and he looked at the words that had guided him through so many hard times. What else does that letter say, Mike? Because you have carried it with you for 7 years, and I have never heard you read the whole thing before tonight. It says that one day I will face a choice between being a monster or being a man, and that the choice will define who I really am inside. The two brothers stopped under a street light, and the yellow glow made a circle around them like they were standing on a stage in a dark theater. You chose to be a man tonight, Mike, and Cuss would be so proud of you for that, because you could have killed all of them, but you did not. A single tear rolled down Mike's cheek, but he wiped it away quickly because he did not like to show weakness even in front of his own little brother. The brothers started walking again, and they left the pool of light behind them and headed deeper into the Brooklyn night toward home and toward their future together now. A black car parked on the street ahead of them suddenly turned on its headlights, and the engine roared to life, and it blocked the brothers' path forward completely. Mike's body went tense again, and he pushed Rodney behind him with one arm because he did not know who was in that car or what they wanted. The car door opened, and a woman stepped out wearing an expensive black coat, and her high heels clicked on the pavement as she walked toward the brothers. The woman stepped into the light, and Mike could see she was a police detective with a badge on her belt, and her face was very serious and focused. Mike Tyson, I am Detective Maria Santos, and I have been watching that warehouse for 3 months waiting for someone to finally take down Victor Castellano tonight. If you were watching, then you saw that I did not kill anyone, and all I did was get my brother back from some very bad men, Detective Santos. Detective Santos and Mike faced each other in the street, and Rodney watched nervously from behind his brother, wondering if this night was about to get even worse. I recorded everything that happened in there tonight, Tyson, including Victor threatening to kill your brother and his men pointing guns at you the whole time through cameras. So what does that mean for me and my brother, Detective? Because we just want to go home and forget this whole night ever happened, if that is possible now. It means you are not in any trouble, Mike, because everything you did tonight was self-defense, and I have the proof to back that up in court if needed. Mike's shoulders dropped and relaxed, and Rodney let out a huge breath of relief, because they were not going to jail for what happened in that warehouse tonight. I thought we were going to prison, Mike, and now we are free. And I cannot believe this is really happening after everything that went down tonight in there. I also want you to know that my father was a boxer, and he told me stories about Cus D'Amato and what he meant to young fighters like you. Mike looked at the business card, and on the back someone had written, "If you ever need help," in blue pen, and he understood what that message really meant. Detective Santos got back in her car and drove away, and Mike and Rodney watched her taillights disappear around a corner. And then they were alone again finally. Mike put the business card in his pocket right next to the letter from Cuss, and he looked at his brother and thought about everything that had happened that night. What are we going to do now, Mike? Because I do not have anywhere to go, and Victor might send more men after me when he gets better from tonight. You are going to come live with me at my house in Ohio, and you are going to get clean, and you are going to start over fresh, brother. The two brothers walked away together down the Brooklyn street, and the first light of dawn was starting to show on the horizon like a promise of better days. 3 weeks had passed since that night in Brooklyn, and Mike's mansion in Ohio sat quiet and peaceful in the early morning light of April 1992. Rodney was jogging on the front lawn, looking healthier than he had looked in years, because 3 weeks without gambling and drinking had changed his whole body and mind. Mike stood on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched his brother run, and he felt proud because Rodney was finally getting his life back together now. A black SUV came racing up the long driveway, kicking up dust behind it, and Mike set down his coffee because he did not recognize that vehicle at all. Rodney, get inside the house right now and do not come out until I tell you it is safe, because we might have company that I was not expecting today. Rodney's face showed fear for just a moment, but then he ran toward the front door, because he trusted his brother and knew Mike would handle whatever was coming for them. The SUV stopped, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out, and they all wore sunglasses, even though the morning sun was not that bright yet in the sky. The lead man stepped forward, and Mike could see he looked a lot like Victor, but older and more dangerous, with silver hair slicked back and a cold, evil smile. You must be Victor's brother, because you have the same ugly face, and the same bad taste in suits, and the same smell of cheap cologne and evil. I am Frank Castellano, and yes, Victor is my younger brother, and you broke his wrist and his pride and his business all in one night, Mr. Tyson Fighterman. Mike stood alone on his front lawn, facing 4 men, and the morning birds were singing in the trees like they did not know something bad was about to happen. Frank removed his sunglasses slowly, and his eyes were ice blue and cold like a frozen lake in winter, and he studied Mike like a snake studies a mouse. Your brother got what he deserved for kidnapping my family and threatening to kill him, so if you came here for an apology, you will not get one today. I did not come here for an apology, Mr. Tyson, because I came here to show you something that will change how you think about this whole situation completely. Frank held up a photograph of a young black woman holding a baby, and the date on the photo said 1968, and Mike's face changed when he saw it. Mike's eyes went wide and the color drained from his face, because he knew that woman in the photograph was his mother, Lorna Mae Tyson, holding baby Rodney years ago. Frank walked closer to Mike and held out the photograph, and Mike could not move because seeing his mother's face had frozen him in place like a statue of stone. Your mother, Lorna, worked for my father back in the 60s before you were born, and she was one of the best people who ever worked for our family. What does my mother have to do with any of this, Frank? Because she has been dead for many years, and she never told me about your family at all. Your mother saved my life when I was 18 years old, and a group of men tried to kill me outside a bar in Brooklyn on a cold winter night. Mike looked at his mother's face in the photograph, and his fingers were shaking because he missed her so much, and he did not understand what Frank was telling him. Frank waved at his men to stay by the car, and then he walked with Mike toward the porch so they could talk in private about the past and present. Tell me everything about my mother and what she did for your family, because I need to know the truth even if it hurts to hear it, Frank. Your mother worked as a nurse at a clinic my father owned in Brooklyn, and she treated anyone who came in, no matter who they were or what they did. The 2 men sat on the porch steps together, and the morning light warmed their faces. And for a moment they were not enemies, but just 2 men talking about the past. My mother never told me she worked for your family, and she never talked about her life before I was born, because she always said the past was the past. She was protecting you, Mike, because she did not want you to know about the world she came from and the people she had to deal with back then every day. Frank pulled out a small gold locket and opened it, and inside were two tiny photographs, and Mike gasped, because one was his mother and one was him as a baby. Mike stood up fast and backed away from Frank, and his whole body was shaking because he did not understand why this gangster had his mother's locket in his pocket. "Your mother gave me that locket the night she saved my life, and she told me to keep it until the day I could give it back to her family. Why would my mother give you something so personal? And why did you wait until now to bring it to me after everything your brother did to my family? I did not know Victor had taken your brother until after it was over, and I came here today to make things right, because I owe your mother a debt." The three men by the SUV shifted nervously as they watched their boss talking with Mike Tyson, and inside the house Rodney was peeking out from behind the curtain watching. "What kind of debt could you owe my mother that would make you drive all the way to Ohio to give me a locket and tell me stories, Frank? The night your mother saved me, there were 5 men with knives, and they had already stabbed me twice when she came out of the clinic with a gun in her hand." Mike could not believe what he was hearing because his mother had always been so gentle and kind, and he could not picture her holding a gun facing down killers. "She did not shoot anyone, Mike. But she stood there like a warrior and told those men that if they wanted to kill me, they would have to go through her first." Mike sat back down on the steps, and Frank sat next to him again, and they were bonded now by the memory of one brave woman who had touched both lives. "That sounds exactly like my mother, because she always told me to stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves no matter what it costs you to do it. Lorna Tyson was the bravest woman I ever met. And when I heard what Victor did to her grandson, I knew I had to come here and fix it myself." "So what exactly do you want from me, Frank? Because people do not drive hundreds of miles just to tell nice stories about the past without wanting something in return." Frank stood up and walked to the edge of the porch and looked out at the green Ohio fields, and Mike could see he was thinking very hard about something important. "Victor has gone crazy, Mike, and he is planning something very bad. And I cannot stop him alone because half the family has chosen to follow him instead of me now." "What exactly is Victor planning, Frank? Because if it has anything to do with my brother or my family, I need to know right now before it is too late." Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document and handed it to Mike, and his face was grim like a man delivering news about a death in the family. Mike unfolded the document and saw a list of names and addresses, and his own address was circled in red ink at the very top of the page in bold. Mike stood up so fast that Frank took a step back, and Mike's whole body was shaking with anger because he understood now exactly what Victor was planning to do to him. "Victor is sending men here to kill me and my brother, and you came to warn me because you feel like you owe my dead mother a favor, is that right, Frank? Victor is sending 20 men here tonight, Mike, and they are coming with guns and bombs and orders to burn this house down with everyone inside it while they sleep." Mike turned to look at his beautiful house and thought about Rodney inside and everything he had worked so hard to build, and his hands clenched with a rage that scared him. Rodney stepped out onto the porch, and his face was pale because he had heard Frank talking about 20 men coming to kill them tonight while they slept in their beds. "Rodney, I need you to go back inside and pack a bag with only what you need, because we are leaving this house in the next 30 minutes right now today." "Where are we going to go, Mike? Because if Victor is sending that many men, then nowhere is safe for us, and they will find us wherever we try to hide." Mike walked to his brother and put his hand on Rodney's shoulder, and Frank watched them with something that looked almost like respect for the bond between the two brothers. Mike whispered something in Rodney's ear that made his brother's eyes go wide with surprise, and then Rodney nodded and ran inside the house to do what Mike had asked him. "I have done what I came here to do, Mike. So now the choice is yours about whether you run or stay and fight against my brother and his army tonight. Cuss always told me that a champion does not run from a fight, and that the best defense is always a good offense. So I have made my choice already, Frank." Mike walked past Frank toward the 3 suited men standing by the SUV, and Frank turned to watch with confusion because he did not understand what was about to happen here. The 3 men tensed up as Mike walked toward them, and their hands moved toward their guns, but they did not draw because Frank had not given them any orders yet. I need you to take a message back to Victor for me, and I need you to tell him exactly what I am about to say, word for word, without changing anything." The lead guard Carlo looked past Mike at Frank because he did not know what to do, and Frank just shrugged because he wanted to see what Mike had planned now. "Tell Victor that I am coming for him tonight before his men can come for me, and tell him that by midnight he will wish he had never heard my name before." Carlo's face went white as a ghost, and the other two guards looked at each other with fear, and Frank raised his eyebrows because he had not expected this response from Mike. "You cannot be serious about attacking Victor directly, because he will have at least 50 men guarding him at his compound, and you are just one man with two fists, Mike." Cuss did not just teach me how to box, Frank, because he also taught me things that nobody else knows about. And tonight Victor is going to learn what those things are. Mike walked back toward his house and left Frank standing by the SUV with his men, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn like fingers pointing toward the future. "What did Cuss teach you, Mike, that makes you think you can take on 50 armed men alone? And what are you not telling me about who you really are inside?" "Cuss did not just train me to be a boxer, Frank, because he trained me to be a warrior, and there is a difference that Victor is going to learn tonight." Mike went inside and closed the door, and Frank stood alone in the driveway with his men, and the peaceful Ohio morning suddenly felt like the calm before a terrible storm. Frank got back in the SUV and told the driver to go, and his face was thoughtful, because he was not sure anymore who was the predator and who was the prey. The black SUV drove away down the long driveway and left a trail of dust behind it, and the mansion was quiet again. But that quiet was full of dangerous energy now. Inside the house, Mike stood in the living room as Rodney came down the stairs carrying 2 bags, and there was a large gun safe in the corner that Mike walked toward. Mike opened the gun safe with a combination he had memorized years ago, and inside there were no guns, but instead there was strange equipment that Rodney had never seen before. Inside the safe was a black vest and night vision goggles and smoke grenades and grappling hooks, and a black leather journal with Customato's name written on the cover in gold. Rodney dropped the bags he was carrying and stared at what was in the safe, and his mouth hung open, because he had never known his brother had any of these things. "Mike, what is all of this stuff? And why do you have military gear in a gun safe? And what did Cuss really teach you that you never told me about before?" Mike pulled out the black journal and held it carefully like it was made of gold, and his face showed that this book meant more to him than almost anything else he owned. Mike sat down on the couch, and Rodney sat in a chair across from him, and the morning light came through the windows, like the world was waiting for Mike to speak. "Before Cuss died, he told me that boxing was just the beginning, and that he had been preparing me for something much bigger and more important than winning titles in a ring." "What was he preparing you for, Mike? Because I do not understand what a boxing trainer would have to do with military gear and grappling hooks and smoke grenades in a safe." The journal page showed hand-drawn pictures of fighting moves that were not boxing, and there were notes about pressure points and nerve strikes and ways to disable armed men quickly. "Cuss was not just a boxing trainer, Rodney, because before he trained fighters, he worked for the government doing things that he never talked about with anyone, except me in private." The two brothers sat in silence for a long moment, and the weight of what Mike had just said hung in the air like something heavy waiting to fall on them. "Are you telling me that Cus D'Amato was some kind of secret agent or spy, and that he passed all of that training down to you before he died, Mike?" "Cus said I had a gift for violence that could be used for good or evil, and he spent years teaching me how to control it and use it only when necessary." Mike stood up and walked back to the safe and pulled out the black tactical vest, and held it up to check that it was still in good condition after years of storage. Mike put on the vest over his sweatshirt, and Rodney watched with a mix of fear and amazement, because his brother looked like a soldier getting ready for a war. He must fight. "I am coming with you tonight, Mike, because you saved my life, and I am not going to let you go fight 50 men alone, even if you have special training. You are not coming with me, Rodney, because your job is to stay safe and to live your life clean, and that is how you pay me back for what I did." But Mike, I cannot just sit here and wait while you go fight an army of killers by yourself. Because what if something happens to you and I never see you again, brother? Mike pulled his brother into a tight hug and held him for a long time, and the morning light wrapped around them like it was trying to keep them safe forever. I promised our mother before she died that I would always protect you, Rodney. And tonight I am going to keep that promise, even if it is the last thing I ever do. Mike walked back to the safe and started loading the equipment into a black duffel bag, and his movements were smooth and practiced, like he had done this many times before in secret. Mike zipped the bag closed and rested his hand on top of it, and his face was calm like a man who had accepted what he must do and was not afraid. Mike picked up the bag and walked toward the back door with Rodney following. And the afternoon sun was high in the sky now because time was moving fast toward nightfall. Behind the mansion, a hidden garage door opened, and inside was a black motorcycle and a modified black van, and both vehicles looked like they were built for serious, dangerous work. Rodney stared at the motorcycle and the van and realized that his brother had been living a secret life that he had never known about for all these years. They knew each other. Detective Santos gave me her card for a reason, Rodney. And if I do not come back by morning, I want you to call her and tell her everything you know, okay? Mike handed Rodney the business card and their fingers touched for just a moment. And in that touch was everything they could not say out loud about love and fear and goodbye. Mike got into the van and the engine rumbled to life, and Rodney stood alone in the garage watching as the shadows grew longer, and the moment of separation finally came upon them. The van drove away, and Mike raised his arm in farewell through the window, and Rodney watched until the van disappeared around the corner. And then he was truly alone with his fear. Rodney looked down at the card in his hand and whispered a prayer for his brother, because it was all he could do now, and he hoped someone somewhere was listening. Mike drove through the Ohio countryside, and the fields of green and gold stretched out to the horizon, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of orange and red like fire. Inside the van, Mike's face was lit by the dashboard lights, and Cuss's journal sat open on the seat beside him, like his old teacher was riding along for this final mission. The GPS showed the destination as Brooklyn, New York, with arrival at 9:30 at night, and Mike was going back to the same city where this whole story had begun. The black van merged onto the highway, and the other drivers had no idea that a warrior was passing them, and the sun set behind in a beautiful blaze of color. Mike reached over and touched the letter from Cuss that was still in his pocket, and he drew strength from it because tonight he would need everything Cuss had ever taught him. The road stretched ahead through the windshield, and the white lines seemed to go on forever, and the night was falling fast, and soon it would be time to fight or die. The New York City skyline appeared in the distance with all its lights twinkling, and Mike's van approached from the west, and the darkness had fully settled over the world now. Mike pulled the van off the highway and entered the dark streets of Brooklyn. And he knew these streets because he had grown up here fighting for his life every single day. Mike's eyes scanned the streets as he drove slowly through Brooklyn looking for Victor's compound, because tonight the hunter had become the hunted and Mike was going to find him first. The van stopped near an abandoned building, and Mike got out with the duffel bag over his shoulder, and the night vision goggles were ready on his forehead for what came next. Mike looked at the large compound 3 blocks away, and he could see lights in the windows and guards walking the perimeter, and he knew Victor was inside, waiting without knowing death was coming. Mike pulled down the goggles and the world turned green and bright, and he could see everything now, including every guard and every camera and every weakness in Victor's defenses tonight. Mike moved through the shadows toward the compound, and he was silent as a ghost, and the streetlights could not touch him because he moved where the darkness was deepest always. The first guard was smoking a cigarette and looking at his phone, and he had no idea that Mike was approaching from behind, like a shadow made of muscle and rage and purpose. Mike's hand covered the guard's mouth and his arm wrapped around the man's neck and squeezed until the guard's eyes closed, and his body went limp without making any sound at all. Mike lowered the guard to the ground and took his radio and rifle and moved toward the next position, and the compound walls loomed ahead like the walls of a castle in a war. Mike pointed a small device at the security camera and pressed a button, and the camera died instantly, because Cuss had taught him that technology was a weapon you could turn against your enemies. Mike threw the grappling hook and climbed the wall hand over hand, and his muscles strained. But he did not make any sound, and he reached the top like a shadow rising. Mike dropped down inside the compound and landed in a crouch, and 3 guards were talking 50 feet away with their backs turned, and the main building stood ahead full of enemies. Mike pulled out 2 smoke grenades and bit the pins and rolled them toward the guards, and thick white smoke began to fill the courtyard, and the guards started coughing and yelling in confusion. Mike moved through the smoke, and his fists and feet flew like weapons, and 3 guards dropped in less than 5 seconds, and none of them ever saw who hit them in the dark. Alarms started screaming, and lights turned on everywhere, and men with guns poured out of the main building, and Mike stood alone in the clearing smoke, like a monster from a nightmare. Victor appeared on a balcony above, wearing a white bathrobe with his broken wrist in a cast, and his face showed both rage and fear when he saw Mike standing below in his home. "Kill him, you fools, kill him right now and bring me his head on a plate, or I swear I will kill every single one of your families myself tonight." 20 armed men formed a circle around Mike with their guns pointed at him from every direction, but Mike stood perfectly still in the center, and his face showed no fear at all. "Before you shoot, you should know that I already called the FBI, and they are 3 minutes away, and anyone who fires a gun tonight goes to prison for life, gentlemen." The guards looked at each other with nervous eyes, and some of them lowered their guns a little, because they were not sure if Mike was lying, and doubt spread through them fast. "He is lying, you idiot, so shoot him now, and we will dump his body in the river before anyone can prove anything happened here tonight in this place. I swear to God." The sound of sirens filled the night, and red and blue lights appeared in the distance, and Mike's smile got wider because he had not been lying, and Victor's face went white as snow. "Detective Santos sends her regards, Victor, and she wanted me to tell you that she has been building a case against you for 3 years, and tonight it is finally over for you." FBI vehicles smashed through the compound gates, and black SUVs surrounded the building, and agents in tactical gear jumped out with their weapons ready for a massive takedown operation tonight. Victor's guards dropped their guns and raised their hands because fighting the FBI meant life in prison, and none of them were willing to die for Victor Castellano tonight. Victor's face twisted with pure rage, and he turned and ran back inside through the balcony doors, because he was not going to let himself be caught by the FBI like a rat. Mike sprinted toward the building and pushed past the surrendering guards, and FBI agents yelled at him to stop, but he ignored them because he had unfinished business with Victor tonight. Detective Santos ran after Mike, calling his name, and she was wearing an FBI tactical vest now because she had been working with them this whole time to bring down Victor's organization. Mike ran up a grand staircase inside the mansion, and he could hear Victor's footsteps above him, and he followed that sound like a wolf following the scent of wounded prey. The mansion was filled with expensive paintings and crystal chandeliers and marble floors, and Mike knew that all of this beauty was built on crime and suffering and innocent blood. Victor ran down a long hallway with his bathrobe flying behind him, and his broken wrist hit the wall, and he was heading toward a secret room at the very end. Victor pressed a hidden panel, and a door slid open to reveal a safe room with bulletproof walls and security monitors, and an escape tunnel that led somewhere far away from this place. Mike reached the end of the hallway just as the door started to close, and he dove forward and slid through the gap at the last second before it sealed shut completely. Both men were now trapped inside the safe room together, and Victor backed against the far wall, and Mike rose slowly to his feet, and the door was locked behind them. Victor pulled a small gun from a hidden drawer and pointed it at Mike, but his hand was shaking so badly that he could barely keep the weapon aimed at the target. The safe room was small and cramped, and the monitors showed FBI agents everywhere outside. But in here, it was just 2 men facing each other, like gladiators waiting to fight to the death. "You can shoot me, Victor, but that will not change what is happening outside. and it will not save you from spending the rest of your life in a prison cell alone. I would rather die than go to prison, Tyson, and I would rather kill you first so at least I can take something from you before this is all over tonight. Mike took one slow step forward and his eyes were locked on the gun and he was calculating the distance and the angle and how fast Victor could pull the trigger. The monitors showed Santos and the FBI trying to cut through the door with sparks flying everywhere, and time was running out for both men trapped inside this bulletproof room together. Cus taught me that the most dangerous man in any fight is the one who has nothing to lose, and Victor, right? Now that man is not you, it is me. Victor's finger tightened on the trigger, and tears started to form in his eyes because he knew deep down that everything he had built was crumbling around him right now in this moment. Mike's hand shot out like a snake and grabbed Victor's wrist and twisted, and the gun fired into the ceiling and plaster rained down on them like white snow falling. The two men struggled for the gun and crashed into the monitors, and screens shattered and sparks flew everywhere as they fought like animals in the small dark room together now. Mike punched Victor hard in the stomach, and Victor doubled over gasping for air, and the gun fell to the floor, and Mike kicked it away into the far corner. Victor was on his knees with his bathrobe torn and blood dripping from a cut on his head, and he looked up at Mike with eyes that had finally lost all hope. Mike stood over Victor with his fist raised and ready to strike, and he was breathing hard and he had to decide right now whether to end this with one final punch. Mike's fist trembled in the air and his face showed the battle inside him, because Cus's voice was echoing in his head about choosing between being a monster or being a man. Mike lowered his fist slowly and stepped back from Victor and let the broken man stay on his knees, because Mike chose to be a man tonight instead of a monster. Victor sobbed on the floor like a child, and he was broken in every way that a man could be broken, and his empire had crumbled to dust around him tonight forever. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter from Cus and held it against his heart because he had kept his promise to be a man and not a monster. The safe room door fell open and bright light flooded in and Detective Santos rushed through with FBI agents behind her. But the fight was already over and Victor was defeated. Detective Santos stopped in the doorway and looked at Victor crying on the floor, and Mike standing over him, and relief washed over her face, because no one was dead tonight. I told you to wait for us, Mike, but I guess I should have known better than to think you would listen to anyone when your family was on the line tonight. Cus always said that a good plan only works until you meet the enemy, and then you have to trust your training and your instincts to get you through. Detective Santos. FBI agents handcuffed Victor on the floor and read him his rights, and Victor did not resist because he was just a shell of the cruel man he used to be before tonight. Victor looked back at Mike one last time as the agents lifted him up, and his eyes were dead, like a man who had already given up on everything, including his own life. Mike watched Victor being led away, and there was no satisfaction on his face, because he did not enjoy violence and he was just tired and glad that this night was finally over. Mike and Detective Santos walked out of the safe room together, and the mansion was destroyed around them and the morning light was starting to show through the broken windows of Victor's palace. There is something I need to tell you, Mike, that I could not say before because I did not know if I could trust you with the truth about my past. What truth are you talking about, Detective? Because I thought we already knew everything about each other after you watched me fight Victor's men in that warehouse 3 weeks ago now. They stepped outside into the courtyard, and FBI vehicles were everywhere, and arrested guards were being loaded into vans, and the chaos of a successful operation swirled all around them both. Santos stopped near a quiet corner away from the other agents and turned to face Mike directly, and her voice dropped so low that only he could hear her next words. My father was not just a boxer, Mike, because he was also trained by Cus D'Amato, and he was part of the same program that made you into what you are today. Mike's eyes went wide and his whole body froze, because he had believed for years that he was the only one, and now Santos was telling him there were others like him. The morning sun rose over the compound and golden light spilled across the courtyard, and Mike realized that his story was connected to others in ways he had never known before. Are you saying that Cuss trained other people like me and that your father was one of them and that there is some kind of secret group out there somewhere? Santos nodded and reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bronze medallion with strange symbols on it, and Mike recognized those symbols from pages in Cuss's journal back home. The medallion showed a fist surrounded by a circle of Latin words, and Mike knew those same symbols were drawn in Cuss's journal, and his whole understanding of the world shifted in that moment. The two of them stood close together with the medallion between them and the FBI agents moving around, had no idea that something bigger than a mob bust was being revealed right now. Mike took the medallion and turned it over in his hands and studied every symbol and every word, because he needed to understand what this meant for his life and his future. Cuss started a group called the Guardians decades ago, and they protect people who cannot protect themselves, and my father was a member until he died 5 years ago in the line of duty. Cuss never told me about any of this, but now I understand why he trained me the way he did, and why he made me promise to use my gifts for good always. An FBI supervisor started walking toward them with a clipboard, and Santos quickly took the medallion back and put it in her pocket before anyone else could see what they were discussing. Mr. Tyson, I do not know exactly what you did here tonight, but you helped us take down the biggest crime family in Brooklyn, and for that, I suppose we owe you thanks. I was just trying to protect my family, sir, and I am glad that the FBI was able to use the opportunity to do some good for the people of this city. The supervisor shook Mike's hand and other agents watched, and some of them could not understand how one man had done what Mike did alone against so many armed enemies tonight. Santos caught Mike's eye and gave him a subtle nod that was a silent promise that their conversation about the Guardians would continue later when they could speak in private again. Mike started walking toward the compound gates because the exhaustion was finally catching up with him, and he needed to get home to Rodney and tell him that everything was okay now. Mike walked out of the compound into the Brooklyn morning, and the sun warmed his face, and people on the street were staring at all the FBI vehicles and wondering what happened. Mike's face was tired but peaceful in the morning light, and he thought about Cuss and the letter, and how much his life had changed since that first night in the warehouse. Mike found his van parked where he had left it, and got in and started the engine, because he had a long drive back to Ohio where his brother was waiting for him. The van drove away from Brooklyn and the morning traffic was light, and the city was waking up, and Mike headed west, toward home with the sun behind him warming his back. Mike's hands were steady on the wheel, and Cuss's letter sat in the cup holder beside him, and Santos had given him the medallion, which now hung from his rearview mirror, swinging gently. The morning light came through the windshield, and Mike had a peaceful look on his face as soft music played on the radio, and he was a warrior finally going home. Hours later, the Ohio countryside appeared with its green fields, and the mansion came into view in the distance, and Mike could see Rodney standing on the porch waiting for him to return. Rodney's face showed pure relief and joy when he saw the van coming, and he ran down the porch steps because his brother was alive and coming home just like he promised. The van stopped, and Mike got out slowly, because every muscle in his body was tired, and Rodney ran toward him with his arms open wide, ready to hug his big brother. The two brothers embraced in front of the mansion, and the morning sun shone down on them, and the green lawn stretched around them, and everything felt peaceful and right in this moment. I stayed up all night praying for you, Mike, and I called Detective Santos, like you told me to, and she said you were amazing and that Victor is going to prison forever. It is over now, Rodney, and Victor will never hurt anyone again, and we can start fresh and build a new life together, without looking over our shoulders every single day anymore. The brothers walked toward the house with their arms around each other, and the front door stood open and welcoming, and a new chapter of their lives was beginning today. Finally, Mike stopped at the door and looked back at the medallion hanging in the van, and he thought about the Guardians and Santos and all the things he still did not understand yet. What are you looking at, Mike, and what is that thing hanging from your mirror? Because I do not remember seeing it before you left last night for Brooklyn and Victor's compound. It is a gift from a friend, Rodney, and I will tell you all about it someday. But right now, I just want to sleep for about a week straight, if that is okay." The brothers went inside, and the door closed behind them, and the house was quiet and peaceful, and the sunlight streamed through the windows, and they were finally safe and home together. Mike collapsed onto the couch, and his eyes closed immediately, and Rodney pulled a blanket over him because for once he could take care of his big brother instead of the other way. Mike's face was peaceful in sleep for the first time in weeks, and all the weight and responsibility was lifted, and he was just a tired man who had done what he had to. Rodney sat in a chair across from Mike and watched over his sleeping brother as the afternoon light moved through the room, and for now he was the guardian of his guardian. Evening fell outside and Mike was still sleeping, and Rodney was making dinner in the kitchen, and normal life was starting again, like the violence of the past weeks had never happened at all. Rodney stirred a pot on the stove and smiled because he was alive, and his brother was safe, and they had food and a home, and that was more than enough for him. The mansion glowed with warm light at night, and the darkness outside could not touch the love inside, and two brothers were together safe within these walls at last, finally, and forever. 3 months later, 3 months had passed, and Mike had opened a boxing gym in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, and every morning the gym was full of young people learning how to fight and how to be strong. Mike held the training mitts and worked with a young boxer, and his voice was patient and kind as he taught the same things that Cuss had taught him so many years ago. The young boxer named Marcus was only 16 years old, but he had the same fire in his eyes that Mike had when he was young and hungry and fighting for his life. All around the gym, young boxers were training and coaches were teaching, and this place had become a home for kids who needed hope and discipline and a second chance at life. Rodney worked at the front desk greeting new members, and he was healthy and happy and clean for 3 months now, and he had finally found his purpose, helping his brother help others. "This is what Cuss wanted me to build, Rodney, and this is what I was meant to do with my life after all the fighting and all the pain and all the lessons." The front door opened, and Detective Santos walked in wearing casual clothes, and she looked around the gym until her eyes found Mike standing in the ring with young Marcus at his side. Mike saw Santos and told Marcus to take a 5-minute break, and he climbed out of the ring and walked toward her because he knew she had not come here just to say hello. Santos had a serious look on her face, and she was carrying a folder under her arm, and Mike knew that whatever was in that folder was going to change things again soon. The two of them moved to a quiet corner of the gym away from the others, and their voices dropped low because what they were about to discuss was not for everyone to hear. In the corner of the gym, surrounded by old boxing posters, Santos opened the folder, and inside were photographs and documents, and Mike leaned in to see what she had brought him today. The photographs showed a large man with scars on his face, and there were criminal records and newspaper clippings about missing children in Detroit. And Mike felt his stomach turn with anger and disgust. His name is Roman Volkov, and he runs a human trafficking ring in Detroit, and the FBI cannot touch him because he has connections that go all the way to the top. Mike. Children, Maria, he is hurting children, and you are telling me that the law cannot do anything to stop him from destroying innocent lives every single day that he walks free out there? The gym was full of young people with their whole lives ahead of them, and Mike thought about all the children that Volkov had stolen, and his decision was made in that moment. "Tell me everything you know about this man, Maria, because if the law cannot stop him, then the guardians will, and I will not let another child suffer because of a monster like him." Santos smiled and reached into her pocket and pulled out the medallion and held it out to Mike. And this time it was not just for him to look at, it was for him to keep. Mike took the medallion and held it in his palm and felt the weight of it, and he understood that this small piece of bronze meant he was part of something bigger than himself. The gym hummed with activity around them, and no one knew what was happening in that quiet corner. But Mike and Santos were connected now by a legacy that stretched back decades to Cuss. Mike put the medallion around his neck and tucked it under his shirt close to his heart, and he felt the cool metal against his skin like a promise he was making to the world. Welcome to the Guardians, Mike Tyson, and may you honor the legacy of Customato and all those who came before us who gave their lives to protect the innocent from evil. Mike shook her hand firmly, and the handshake sealed his commitment, and the morning light streamed through the windows, like a blessing on the new journey that was officially beginning for him now. Mike turned to look at Rodney, who was watching from across the gym with curious eyes, and Mike knew he would have to explain everything to his brother very soon about his new life. Rodney walked toward them with a question in his eyes because he could tell that something important had just happened, and he was tired of being left out of his brother's secret world. The three of them stood together with Mike in the middle, and he looked from Santos to Rodney and back again, and knew it was time to bring his brother into the light. Rodney, there are things I need to tell you about Cuss, and about what I really do, and about why Detective Santos keeps showing up with folders full of bad men who need to be stopped. Rodney nodded slowly because he had been waiting for this moment since the night in the warehouse, and he was finally going to learn the truth about who his brother really was inside. Mike put his arm around his brother, and the three of them walked toward the office in the back of the gym where Mike could finally tell Rodney everything from the very beginning. The office door closed behind them, and the word "private" on the frosted glass seemed to glow in the morning light, and inside that room, the truth would finally be spoken out loud. Mike sat behind the desk and placed Cuss's journal in front of him, and Rodney leaned forward in his chair, and Santos stood by the window watching the brothers have this important moment. It all started when I was 13 years old, and Cuss saw something in me that no one else could see, and he decided to turn me into something more than just a boxer. The office grew darker as time passed, and Mike told the whole story, and Rodney listened with wide eyes, and Santos nodded along, and the truth finally lived in the open air between them. Rodney sat back in his chair, and his mind was overwhelmed, but he finally understood who his brother really was, and why he had always felt so safe whenever Mike was around him. I always knew you were special, Mike, but I never knew how special until right now, and I am so proud to be your brother, and I want to help in any way I can. The three of them sat in that office with an alliance formed between them, and the gym was visible through the window, and the future stretched ahead full of both purpose and danger. Mike stood and walked to the window and looked out at all the young people training in his gym, and he thought about how many of them might need saving from monsters someday soon. Mike's reflection stared back at him from the window glass, and the medallion hung around his neck, and he was a guardian now, watching over a flock of young warriors who trusted him. The gym spread out before him through the window, with all those young boxers training hard and building dreams and forging hope, and the future of fighting spirit was alive and growing strong. Santos joined Mike at the window and stood beside him, and they both looked out at the same view, and she spoke quietly about what came next for them and the Guardians. Roman Volkov has a compound outside Detroit, and he is holding at least 20 children there right now, and every day we wait is another day those kids suffer under his control, Mike. Then we do not wait, Maria, because those children have families who are looking for them, and I will not let another night pass while they are trapped with that monster in his compound. Mike walked back to the desk and picked up the folder and studied the photographs again, and Rodney and Santos watched as they could almost see the plan forming in his sharp warrior mind. Cuss always said that the measure of a man is not how hard he can hit, but how much he is willing to sacrifice for people who cannot fight for themselves against evil. I am coming with you this time, Mike, because I have been training for 3 months, and I am not going to let you face another army of bad guys alone ever again. The three of them stood together in that office, united in purpose, and the afternoon sun was setting outside, and casting long shadows, and heroes were preparing for their next battle against darkness. Mike smiled proudly at his brother and put his hand on Rodney's shoulder, because the young man who had been lost was now standing strong and ready to fight for something bigger than himself. The folder lay open on the desk with Volkov's scarred face staring up at them, and the newspaper clippings about missing children reminded them all why this fight mattered more than anything else. Outside the office, the gym continued with training, and the young boxers had no idea that a mission was being planned to save children just like them from a monster in Detroit. Mike reached up and touched the medallion around his neck and felt its weight, and drew strength from all the guardians who had come before him and who had given everything to protect the innocent. Cuss said in his letter that one day I would face a room full of armed men and nobody would move, and that day I would finally understand who I really am. The setting sun filled the office with golden light, and Mike stood tall in the center with Rodney and Santos beside him, and they were warriors assembled and ready for the battle ahead. I am a guardian now, and I will protect the innocent for as long as I have breath in my body, because that is what Cuss made me, and that is who I choose to be. The gym glowed golden in the sunset light, and young boxers trained, and through the office window Mike Tyson stood ready for whatever came next, because a legend was only just beginning now.